Alright guys, how's it going? There's been one or two interesting and surprising updates recently, and I've decided to throw them all into one pre-CES video. Starting over at Taiwanese website, Apple Daily, and I cannot read a single word of Chinese, but I know a man who can pretty well. Retired engineer over at Twitter was asked to translate this article, and he obliged. So apparently, TSMC's 7nm production capacity is fully booked, which is no surprise. And relief may only come when Apple migrates to 5nm in the second half of 2020. TSMC's 7nm capacity will increase to 140,000 wafers per month in the second half of 2020. By order of proportion, the ranking of customers using 7nm will be reshuffled, with AMD's orders set to double, replacing Apple as the largest customer for 7nm. And it continues with, TSMC's 7nm production capacity continues to rise. The industry expects monthly capacity to reach 110,000 wafers in the first half of 2020. And the top 5 customers by order of proportion are Apple, HiSilicon, Qualcomm, AMD and MediaTek. And except for MediaTek, orders share is split at roughly 20% each, depending on seasonality. MediaTek's share is around 13%. And then finally, however, with 7nm capacity rising to 140,000 wafers per month in the second half of 2020, and with the largest customer Apple migrating to 5nm with the A14, customer ranking by 7nm orders will be reshuffled. In one fell swoop, AMD booked capacity for 30,000 wafers, which is 21% of the total 7nm capacity in the second half. Not all of AMD's products are on 7nm. In fact, none of their laptop products whatsoever, and there's still plenty of second generation Ryzen going around too. However, during 2020, a large majority of AMD products should have moved on to 7nm. In the past, I've discussed the potential pitfalls of AMD having so much product on the same 7nm node at TSMC, wondering how they could manufacture all of it. So what I'm going to do now is take a look at the size of the markets and see if this 30,000 wafer allocation will even be enough. Let's start with the lucrative data center market. Over at Seeking Alpha recently, Ruth Cotter of AMD said, AMD are at about 7% data center market share today. If you look at the IDC total addressable market of about 20 million units. And also, their target is to get to 10% share by the second quarter of 2020. So if we just use this 10% number for the whole year average, presumably right now they're at 7%, and then they will increase to 10% by the second quarter, and presumably finish the year around 13%. Now 20 million units, 7% of that is 1.4 million. So that's 1.4 million EPYC CPUs today. And the assumed 10% average coming for 2020 would obviously be 2 million. We know that they're being sold in packages of up to 8 chiplets. Some have got 6 chiplets, some have got 4, but these 8 chiplet packages have been the top sellers. But let's just take an average of 6 chiplets per package. For 2 million of those sold, that would mean 12 million of these tiny Zen 2 chiplets would need to be manufactured in 2020, simply for EPYC. Now obviously, 12 million per year divided by 12 months in the year gives us a nice round number of 1 million Zen 2 chiplets required per month for AMD to reach their 10% aim. So if we now move to our old favourite, the Kali Technologies die per wafer calculator, as always the first thing to do is change to 300mm wafers, and we know from these fantastic die shots over at Fritz that the die size is 10.32mm by 7.34mm. 10.32, 7.34. And based on this slide that I talked about recently, defect density could be around about the 0.06 mark today. Possibly even lower, but we just don't know. Let's just go with 0.06. Yield is a colossal 95.5% for 736 good dies on the wafer. Remember, 1 million Zen 2 chiplets required per month. Now divide that by 736. And that means that only 1,359 wafers are needed for EPYC every month. Now for the PC, things start to get a lot more difficult. First of all, the PC covers laptops and desktops. And according to Gartner, in 2018, PC shipments were around about 260 million units. And these PCs are shipped by the likes of Lenovo and HP. There's no actual data on the number of people who are self-building, but it's likely less than a handful of millions anyway. Now, according to data from IDC a couple of years ago, of that around 260 million number, 161.6 million were laptops and only about 98 million desktops. So around about 62% of PCs sold are laptops and 38% are desktops. Let's say that due to self-building, we can make desktop sales a nice clean 100 million units. Now, according to Mercury research data, which was presented to Tom's Hardware last November, AMD's desktop unit share doubled from a rather pitiful 9.1% back in the third quarter of 2016, that was pre-Ryzen of course, to what is now 18% in the third quarter of 2019. And this has almost certainly risen further since then due to a lessening of supply constraints. So let's just call this number now 19%. And also, AMD does tend to do better in the self-building market, which we can probably reflect by adding another 1%. I do like round numbers, so let's just say that's Intel at 80% of the desktop market and AMD at 20%. The reality here is, those numbers will not be far off. What is difficult to know though is how the split will be regarding Zen 2 and other AMD products which are on older manufacturing processes. However, for the purpose of this video, we'll just assume that everything, or at least the vast majority of AMD products, will be moving on to the 7nm node this year. Now obviously, 20% market share of 100 million desktop PCs, that requires 20 million CPUs. And we know that chips like the 3900X, the 3950X, and the Threadrippers all use more than one chiplet. However, they likely comprise less than 20% of AMD's desktop sales. In order to reflect that in the numbers, what we'll say is that these 20 million CPUs that AMD shipped, on average, they're going to require 1.2 Zen 2 chiplets per package. So overall, that would mean 24 million Zen 2 chiplets for the desktop market in 2020. Now, 24 million divided by 12 is 2 million. So that means AMD needs to manufacture 2 million more Zen 2 chiplets per month, simply for the desktop. And obviously, because it's the same chiplet, we're going to use the same 736 good dies. So divide by 736, meaning that Ryzen sales require 2,718 wafers per month to supply this 20% of the PC desktop market. So remember, that was 1,359 EPYC wafers and now 2,718 Ryzen wafers. That means we're just over 4,000 wafers per month, and it's pretty interesting to see how this is all panning out. Next up though, laptops. And remember, that was around about 160 million units, total Intel and AMD, that was shipped over the past year. Now, in fact, as of today, not a single 7nm laptop chip has been sold by AMD. However, Lisa Su told Toms that the Ryzen 4000 7nm mobile chips, known as Renoir, would be coming early 2020. Most indications are that we'll get an announcement at CES. And recently, APISAC leaked an 8-core, 16-thread model, which looks like it performs only slightly behind the desktop chips. That's with a base clock of 2.9 GHz and a boost of 4.3. This will be a 45-watt laptop part, I'm sure. Now, just like with AMD's desktop share, their mobile share has been steadily increasing. That's actually a decent jump from 8.8% in the second quarter of 2018 to almost 15% in the third quarter last year. And remember, the number of laptops sold was around about 160 million. And 15% of 160 million is 24 million. So that's 24 million laptop chips that AMD must be shipping every year. This time though, instead of using the chiplet architecture, these Ryzen 4000 mobile chips based on Zen 2 will remain monolithic APUs. That's 8 Zen 2 cores still with Vega graphics. Reddit user RoGame found a leak with all the upcoming parts, and it was noted that the top end likely now has 12 or 13 Vega compute units, That's compared to the maximum 11 of the current Picasso generation. The 12nm Picasso die that you're looking at here, or actually this is the Raven Ridge one, which is a 14nm die, but they're basically identical. You can see the 4 cores of the single core complex. And this whole blue area here fits into this entire die around about 5 times. So the CCX itself must be around about 42 square millimeters. As I already discussed, the 8-core Zen 2 chiplet is around about 75 square millimeters. However, that includes this mammoth 32 megabytes of L3 cache. And it's pretty likely that Renoir, just like Raven Ridge and Picasso, it'll only have half of this L3 cache. And that's actually a pretty large saving in area. If you imagine cutting out, say, these 8 squares here, that's probably going to save around about 20 square millimeters or thereabouts. There's also going to be some savings on the Infinity Fabric links. So overall, I would expect 8 cores on the Ryzen Mobile 4000 series to perhaps only take up 50 square millimeters. So really, that's not an awful lot more than the current 4 cores. And that's a major benefit of the shrink to 7nm. As I mentioned, with only 2 additional Vega compute units, the shrink to 7nm should also bring some nice savings on area to the GPU part. You're basically looking at half the size of this and then another couple of CUs. And this is just an educated guess, but I think that this incoming 7nm mobile APU could come in around about the 180 to 190 square millimeter mark. And that's a reasonable die area saving over Picasso. Let's just take the midpoint of that, so 185 square millimeters. And we'll go back to the die per wafer calculator. So we'll just take a width of 18.5 and a height of 10, and the usual 0.06 defect rate. Now that gives us 272 good dies. And a lot of these defective dies will be salvageable, either as quad cores or chips with less CUs. So let's go with a total of, say, 295 usable dies on the wafer. Now remember, AMD's got around about a 15% share in laptops currently. And that means they need to manufacture 24 million chips per year. 15% of 160 million, which is 2 million chips per month. And those 2 million chips divided by 295 on the wafer requires 6,780 wafers every month, just for those 7nm laptop parts. And that is now 3 products, and we have got a total of 10,857 wafers consumed. Remember though, this is AMD's entire server, desktop and mobile portfolio on 7nm. Which is something they absolutely are nowhere near doing today. And that is obvious because their entire mobile lineup is on older manufacturing. That's the CPUs though, and it's easy to do so, but let's not forget about AMD's graphics. The entire GPU market is around about 44 million units per year, but there are few data points on what is actually selling. If we look at the Steam hardware survey, we can see the RX 5700 XT is on 0.22% of the entire survey. But whatever this means in terms of cards sold is anyone's guess. However, Nvidia has consistently been above 70% discrete GPU market share for some time now, at least according to John Peddy's numbers. Going back to the hardware survey, if we compare the 2070 Super, that has got 0.66% in the market. The 2060 Super is at 0.43% of the market, and even the 2080 Super, which launched later, remember, and it is in another price league entirely. All 3 of Nvidia's super cards have clearly outsold the 5700 XT, with the 2070 Super especially being well ahead, having 0.63% of the whole survey. In fact, these 3 Nvidia supercards have outsold the 5700 XT by around 6 to 1. Perhaps a better way to look at this would be to take an average of around 25% AMD market share, and then we can figure out how well Navi is doing for AMD versus other AMD cards. The RX 580 is by far and away AMD's best seller today, on 1.32% of the Steam market. And that peaked at 1.6% a couple of months ago. The RX 590, that is way down at 0.24%, and that maybe even peaked at only 0.28% last month. And looking at the 5700 XT again, it may already have peaked at 0.22%, or at least at its current prices. But actually, if you consider the higher pricing of the XT, it may be doing better than expected. But if we say that AMD has an average of 25% graphics card unit market share, 25% of 44 million cards sold every year is 11 million cards. It seems pretty unlikely that the 5700 XT and 5700 non-XT would be even 2 million of those sales combined. But let's just err on the side of caution and go with 3 million sales of the 5700 series over the course of this year. Now, Navi 10 is 251 square millimeters, and the square root of that is 15.84. And that gives us 186 good dies and 30 defective. And most of those are going to be fine as the non-XTs. So I've just decided to take 205 working dies altogether. Now, with my assumed 3 million sales for Navi 10 next year, divided by 12 is 250,000 units per month. And that 250,000 divided by the 205 dies on the wafer means that Navi 10 will consume 1220 wafers per month this year. Now, we also just got Navi 14 and the RX 5500 series, which incidentally looks absolutely terrible to me. But let's assume another similar figure of 3 million of these sold per year in 2020, and the die size of this one, Navi 14, is 158 square millimeters. Now, the square root of 158 is 12.57, and that gives us a really nice yield of 91%, 328 good dies and 32 defective. Let's just go with 350 working dies overall on this wafer. As before, we're assuming 250,000 chips per month, which we now divide by 350, and that would be 714 wafers for Navi 14 every month. Now, we also know that Big Navi is coming at some point, and we can be fairly certain it will be a market flop, just like every other high-end Radeon Technologies Group card. However, Google might end up buying a few for Stadia. There may even be another Navi chip coming, but for those, I'm not even going to bother with the calculator, and I'll just say that AMD will likely consume around 500 7nm wafers on these higher-end Navi designs every month. And adding up all of those wafers gets us a total of 13,291 wafers. AMD does have the embedded market too, of course, and that will consume even more wafers. And based on my calculations, if AMD switched everything over to 7nm today, then they should be able to do that while maintaining their current market shares with around the 15,000 wafers they already have. That's with the exception of Epic, of course, which is set to grow to around 10% market share. So with AMD booked capacity for 30,000 wafers, that is double the number of wafers coming in the second half of 2020. Clearly, there must be massive room for AMD to grow market share in all segments. Clearly, except for the fact that there is one, or rather two, glaring omissions from my analysis so far. The big problem for me and AMD on 7nm was always going to be the game consoles. First of all, they are usually quite large chips. The Xbox One chip here is 363 square millimeters, and the PlayStation 4's here is 348 square millimeters. And second, they are very high volume for such large chips. Generally speaking, in all other semiconductor markets, the larger chips are the more powerful chips, therefore they cost more, which means they sell lower units. And if we look at the total sales of the current console generation, the PlayStation 4 and its derivatives have sold 103 million units, which is an average of 17.17 million units in the 6 years of its existence so far. Now, the Xbox One and its derivatives have sold around 47 million units, which is 7.83 million per year. And if you combine those two numbers, they come right in line with AMD's desktop and laptop yearly sales. But remember, those laptop chips are all on 12nm, not 7nm, and the desktop chips are tiny chiplets at rather high cost. Could the consoles also be chiplet based? That is a theory I long promoted, as that would be the most viable method of cutting down on die sizes and therefore the number of wafers required. However, until that point is proven, we need to assume that both the new chips and the new consoles will continue to be monolithic designs. There were sporadic leaks about supposed console specs all of last year. However, in the past few months again, something called Oberon, Gen 2 here, came to light. And that something is believed by many to be the PlayStation 5's chip, for the reason that Gen 1 here was also noted at 0.911 GHz, and Gen 0 was 0.8 GHz, which are the speeds of the PlayStation Generation 1 and the PS4 Pro GPUs. Now, unbelievably, a bunch of AMD data for upcoming products was stored on GitHub, and believably was discovered. Part of it contained some spec information on the PlayStation 5 chip and also the upcoming Xbox One Series X chip. And there's a couple of things here that really stand out. First of all, the Xbox processor should be a lot faster than the PlayStation's, by virtue of the fact that it has 55% more compute units. GPU performance is a combination of the number of compute units and their speed, of course. And that's the second thing that stands out. This supposed 2 GHz clock speed of the PlayStation 5's chip. And essentially, the PlayStation 5 chip with its 36 CUs looks an awful lot like Navi 10, which as we can see has 40 compute units. In this case, 2 of those units would be disabled. So this would be equivalent to an RX 5700 non-XT, except at much higher clock speeds. The problem I have with this is, the 5700 is a bit of a power hog, pulling around 166 watts at only 1700 MHz. That's the same 36 compute units at 1700 MHz, pulling 166 watts. At 2 GHz, this number should be easily over 200 watts, and there's no way that can be cooled in a typical game console. It's no secret that I am pretty dismayed by Navi's power efficiency, so I'm wondering, is there something just broken in the design, which has been fixed in the consoles? Either that or these have been aggressively tuned for performance per watt, which we will see about, I guess. For the purposes of this video though, I have no alternative but to accept what the leaks are suggesting. One thing is certain, while the power could have been fixed in the console chips, there is no magic going on regarding die sizes, and the RDNA architecture should be consistent between designs. Navi 10, as noted earlier, has 40 RDNA compute units and a die size of 251 square millimeters. And here you see it again, with 4 disabled. Oberon will be the same as this. It will be a 40 CU design, with 4 of these being disabled for redundancy purposes. That's the same as the PlayStation 4, which actually had 20 Radeon cores. However, 2 of those were disabled for redundancy. So let's just say that this 251 square millimeter design for Navi 10 is the GPU portion of the PS5. We also know that it's got 8 Zen 2 cores, and that's going to come in at around 75 square millimeters. And after you throw in that bit of special sauce or whatever else is in the design, and it is very likely to be north of 320 square millimeters. So why not just go with this old size of 348 square millimeters? Now recall that the PlayStation 4 sold 17.17 million chips per year on average over the past 6 years. And divided by 12 means 1,430,833 units sold every month. So how many wafers are needed for this 348 square millimeter design on 7 nanometers today? The die per wafer calculator will reveal all. Now the square root of 348 is 18.65 per side. This is not an exact science, but it's close enough that it just doesn't really matter. And again, we're at the same 0.06 defect density, the same with everything else on AMD's 7 nanometers. Now with a bit of wafer centering here, we can actually get the good dies up to 128. And remember, there is some redundancy due to the disabled compute units. So these 29 defective dies, let's just say that overall, Sony are gonna get around 150 working PlayStation 5 chips on every wafer. So we bring back this 1.43 million chips that are required every month and divide that by 150. Which means Sony if they intend to match their previous generation sales, will need 9,539 wafers every month. 9,500 simply for the PlayStation 5 APU. And presumably Sony will be looking to beat last gen's numbers. Then again, the console wars are generally won by the most powerful part. As I noted, that appears to be the Xbox by some distance. A quick look at the specs of that again shows 56 compute units at 1700 MHz. In raw teraflops, the Xbox is miles ahead. And while that may make you believe that it'll be even harder to cool, this much reduced clock speed of 1700 MHz would be an enormous help. And in fact, looking at both the specs here in this table, I believe that combined they strengthen the case for the leak being legit. These numbers here and these numbers here look like they could match up against each other. So in that case, if the Xbox chip is so much more powerful, why on earth would Sony not have gone down that route with the PlayStation chip as well? The answer to that is clearly the size of the chip. Everything in chip design is a trade-off, and Microsoft appear to have traded die size for performance. Just like 36 CUs are 36 CUs in size, whether it's a PlayStation or Navi 10 die, 56 CUs are 56 CUs in size, and the Xbox chip must be enormous. Furthermore, this GDDR6 bandwidth of 560GB per second, that requires a 320-bit memory bus setup, which would further increase the die size. Navi 10 has 256-bit memory controller round the sides, as we can see, and that will also be the size of the PlayStation 5 controller. But for the Xbox, just add 50% to this. Basically, we're saying that the Xbox graphics portion should come in around about 375 square millimeters, which should be larger than the entire PlayStation 5 chip. And again, the Xbox Series X is coming with an 8-core Zen 2 chip, which we know comes in around 75 square millimeters. And so if we combine that to the 375 of the graphics portion, we're already at the 450 square millimeter mark. But I'm going to be kind and assume that there's some kind of area efficiency going on, and I will drop the size of that APU down to 420 square millimeters. A little bit of erring on the side of caution there for me as well. Now remember that the Xbox One sold 47 million units. That was over 6 years though, so 7.83 million per year, which is 652,777 units per month. How many wafers would these sales be every month at 420 square millimeters on 7 nanometers? The square root of 420 millimeters is 20.49 on each side. As always, 0.06 defects, which gives us 94 good dies and 26 defective dies. But the chip almost certainly has redundancy too, and in fact, this 56 compute unit chip will be a 60 compute unit chip in design. So with that in mind, we can reasonably expect 110 good Xbox chips on the wafer. So we take this number of 652,000 and divide by 110, which means the Xbox on 7 nanometers at 420 square millimeters would require 5,934 wafers every month. And combined, the game consoles are consuming 15,472 7nm wafers every month. Altogether, AMD's entire product portfolio just fits into that 30,000 wafers per month that they will have starting in the second half of 2020. And I have to say, I love it when a bit of analysis comes together like this. There's still a few more questions that need answering though, and I guess the most obvious one is, what happens if the Xbox and PlayStation sales of last generation are reversed? As I noted, the most powerful game console generally wins in terms of sales. If we switch these sales numbers around and assume that the Xbox would be the one selling 1.43 million units every month, the mammoth die size of at least 420 square millimeters would mean an extra wafer requirement of around about 2,000 more per month. That's even with the PlayStation's dropping, of course. And it's worth remembering that I believe I've been cautious on the die sizes. And again, don't forget, both of these companies will be looking to better their sales against the previous generation. And if you ever wondered why I talked so much about the Zen 2 chiplet and Navi chiplets being the way forward, there's your answer. And to be frank, if any of these new consoles do turn out to be chiplet based, I'll be feeling very smug indeed, because chiplets will solve all of these manufacturing issues. The final issue I have here with all of this is that there appears to be an awful lot of risk involved for AMD regarding the game consoles. Contracts must have been in place years ago. This 30,000 wafers that AMD has been allocated, this only came as a result of Apple migrating to 5nm, so AMD got a bunch of Apple's old capacity. Had that not happened, AMD would have been stuck with what? Barely enough wafers to supply the console market at its current level of sales, let alone everything else they're trying to manufacture on 7nm. And look, obviously, AMD has some very smart people running strategy, and they can see a certain distance ahead. But all of this appears to have come together really well, and I can't imagine that luck hasn't been involved at various points along the way for this to all pan out the way it has. They do say that you make your own luck, however. And Lisa Su has a pre-CES presentation on the 6th, which is being live streamed, and I think that we'll be doing a live blog over at the website. So check that out, and I'll be back with some CES roundup thing, probably before too long. I hope the new year is treating you well already, and I'll catch you later, guys.